This chat is about the concept of ghettos, and specifically the first ghetto, the first complete segregation of Jewish people into an adjacent neighborhood, but don't live among us, was in Venice, Italy. And previous to this law, Jewish people had lived out in the hinterlands, and they traveled into the city, and because they couldn't at this time in Italy own land, they couldn't be a part of a guild, so they were shut out economically. So their source of making money was to trade merchants, some money lending, but trading as merchants. And so they were allowed to come into the city, and they could stay for 15 days, and then they had to go back to outside the city where they were allowed to live. So the idea that was proposed and passed was to allow the Jewish people to live in the city center as long as they lived in a separate neighborhood, and that's where the first ghetto was created. And the word ghetto. So scholars debate about the actual word and where it comes from, but no one debates that the first segregated neighborhood was Venice in the early 16th century, and it was to move the Jews outside of, so they could not corrupt the Christian population, but they could be close enough to have there was an economic benefit to having the Jews in close proximity. So the Venice ghetto was established. It had very high walls, so it could lock the Jews in at night, so they couldn't do whatever practices the people were afraid of, that made the population of Venice feel safe. And the gates were unlocked in the morning, and the Jewish people could go in and out. Of course, they had to wear an emblem that marked them as Jews. That's going to be a whole nother chat. But that's how they lived, and that's the concept of the first ghetto. And what happens is, what I want to bring up here is, so that concept of, okay, you can live and you can interact with us during the day, and you just go over here, and we're going to lock you up at the times we're afraid of you. So Passover and Easter, the doors were locked. The Jews were just, you guys stay in there because we're afraid of you. And so that actually, the Venetian segregated neighborhood flourished for a few hundred years, and they had the Sephardic Jews that were removed from the Iberian Peninsula in the late 15th century, began to migrate over, and there was a lot of persecution in Germany and France, Germany mostly, and so those Jews began, they made their way to Venice, and it was considered the perfect, the Jews wrote that it was a perfect environment for them. So, but back to the concept of ghettos. So those segregated neighborhoods or ghettos began to be across Europe in the Middle Ages. That concept took hold, and they built those across Europe. So one of the things that I find interesting about this is, as we approach the advent of the National Socialist organization. So let me back up and say that the segregated neighborhoods, the ghettos, went away in when Napoleon made citizens of the Jews, and they were kind of emancipated from the position that they played in society up until that point. Napoleon made them citizens, and so there was no segregating. They were equal to everyone else, and so the concept of ghettos went away. And that all happened in the late 18th, early 19th century. And so as you fast forward, and then of course Napoleon is defeated, and this is going to be a whole nother chat, but the question of the Jews hung in the air after that, because France, or Napoleon, had put their citizenship on all of Europe when he conquered all of Europe. So then what do we do? So what you see when Germany in the 1930s begins to reestablish separate neighborhoods. They set up ghettos. And it wasn't a new concept. It was an ancient concept, just like the badges that Germany forced people to wear, the yellow stars that we all think is so horrendous. But that practice was an ancient practice that came from the 13th century. So these things weren't new on the earth. They were traditions that were just redeployed in the 1930s and 1940s. And so what I want to just bring that up, and so in when the ghettos were reestablished in Vienna, they established a ghetto. It had 65,000 people on it. Only 2,000 of them survived after World War II. They reestablished the ghetto right outside of Vienna. There were 65,000 people in it. They went to concentration camps eventually. 2,000 survived. Brest is a Russian. I mean, there's a list of just all through that Central Europe where they pushed them into the ghettos, and then they were easy to do away with. And so that's the history of ghettos. And that is the fact that what the Germans did and it was an ancient practice that they just revived feeds into the concept that the past is prologue. So the past matters, and we should look at what was done so that we don't allow in our time, when it's our time to make a difference as believers, we don't follow in a path that is something that we'll be ashamed of.